Hi everyone. In today's video we're going to start euthanasia. Now this is an application topic, so let me explain how it will work before we get started. In an exam you may get two types of questions. One that asks for euthanasia on its own, such as critically explore the sanctity of life, something like that. Probably the word will be slightly different, but you might have something specific on an area of this video. The other question you might get asked is applying natural law or situationics to euthanasia. So natural law does not work when dealing with issues surrounding euthanasia, something like that. So you not only need to know this topic on its own, you need to be able to apply natural law or situationics to it critically. The critically is what is most important. So the first part of this video we will be working through different words associated with euthanasia. We'll then work through a couple of case studies to help you think about the actual reality of euthanasia, and then the final part of this video is applying it to natural law and situation ethics. So let's get started. Whoops. Should do us. Sorry, try and get rid of that. So, euthanasia. I want you to see if you can try and work out who you think this person is that said this quote. Now, this quote is quite shocking. You do not need to write all of the quote down. The importance of this is not the actual length of the quote. The importance of this is what it implies, what it is saying, and what do you think about it. So the quote goes as follows: people with children with Down syndrome have no reason to feel guilty about putting a Down syndrome baby away, whether it's put away in the sense of hidden in a sanatorium or in a more responsible, lethal sense. It is sad, yes, dreadful, but it carries no guilt. True guilt arises only from an offence against a person, and a Downs is not a person. Pretty shocking. Who do you think said that? Just give you a moment. Who comes to mind? Who do you think of first that might have said something like that? Is somebody that we've looked at? Somebody that we've mentioned? Who do you think would say something like that? Students often respond with people like Hitler. That is often who people respond with. You might be very surprised that the answer is Joseph Fletcher, as in situation ethics, agape, Joseph Fletcher. So this is a link that you can make to situation ethics, that for the man that is all about doing the most loving thing, promoting love relative to the situation, he thinks the best solution for somebody with Down syndrome is either to be put in a hospital, so put away, so in a sanatorium back in his day, or a lethal sense, meaning a lethal injection, for example. Putting them to death. So quite interesting that a man that is all about agape is so prejudiced against children with Down syndrome. So what is euthanasia? Euthanasia is from the Greek word eu, meaning easy, and thanatos, meaning death. It means easy death, not to be confused or mistaken with suicide. Suicide is different from euthanasia. Euthanasia is for people that would want to continue living, but a disease of some sort has taken that out of their control. It is the intentional, premature ending of another person's life, either voluntary, the person consents to it if they have a terminal or an incurable illness. Terminal means 6 months to live. Or non-voluntary. This means that they cannot request or consent to it, but the person representing their interests, such as a family member, do. And this is if they're in a coma or a PVS. You need to know PVS. PVS means persistent vegetative state. So persistent vegetative state. In an exam, you can use PVS, that is fine, but I advise that the first time you use PVS to actually put it as the full word, persistent vegetative state, in brackets PVS, just to show an examiner that you actually know what it stands for. It can also be via active, which is illegal in the UK, illegal in this country, which is lethal injection, for example, so capital punishment, that is active. So anything used within that, but obviously that's not active euthanasia because they don't consent to it. But active euthanasia is in a lethal injection sense or medication. Passive is known as non-treatment decision. So for example, withholding medicine, withdrawing life support. Now this is legal in the UK. So for example, you do not have to have chemotherapy, for example, even if it will kill you. You do not have to take the medication. You don't have to have a life support machine. So they can't force you to have these, even if the end outcome is that you will die. That is known as passive euthanasia. That is legal in this country. You do not need to get bogged down in an essay going over all of these things. Please do not start an essay out by laying all of this out. It is not necessary and it's pretty boring, to be honest with you. All you need to do is you need to maybe drop these things in as you're going through your essay. So if you talk about a PVS, talk about non-voluntary. If you're talking about somebody not wanting medication or chemotherapy, talk about passive. So just drop these in if they're relevant in an essay. Do not start an essay though just focused on these. People also very strongly argue that they do not wish to be resuscitated. So when you get the defibrillators there, when you have those, some people ask that they do not want them. So some people say that they do not want to be resuscitated. They do not want to be brought back because of the risk of them being brought back into a PVS. And so this person's tattoo says VE member, voluntary euthanasia member. They are wanting, they are for supporting euthanasia and therefore do not want to be resuscitated. A paramedic ignores that. Their duty of care means that even if you have a tattoo like that, they will not take that into account. So to be honest with you, it's a tattoo that doesn't work because anybody in a hospital, etc., has such a duty of care that they would not follow that, especially because it might be an old tattoo, for example, or the person might change their mind. So passive versus active. James Rachels argues that passive euthanasia is actually worse, as it is cruel and the process of dying may be long and drawn out. I think James Rachels' point here is brilliant. I agree with him completely. So active is not legal in this country, where you'll give someone a lethal injection or a lethal dose of medication that will help them die peacefully, painlessly. That is illegal, yet passive is legal. That means somebody's starving themselves. One of the cases we look at is a man named Tony Nicholson. He had locked-in syndrome, and I'll go over what that is once we get to that slide. But he starved himself in order to die. It took days. So days of excruciating pain and agony, starving himself to death because our government and our laws do not recognise that active is actually far nicer. So when he says that it's cruel and the process of dying is long and drawn out, he is very accurate there. There is also a debate known as acts and omissions. There is a moral difference between carrying out an action and merely omitting it. So stop or refraining from doing it. And so I will send you the link to the Peter Singer Drowning Child link in the email. But basically what Peter Singer is arguing is that we do not have what is called the Samaritan's Law in this country, which means that if, for example, you saw a child drowning in a... You know, if you were walking around Pizon Park or somewhere like that and you saw a child drowning that was not your child, you do not have to save them. Our country does not have the Samaritan Law. You do not have to save them. So the acts and omissions, an act is illegal. That's, for example, holding somebody under the water. Omissions is just omitting or refraining from help. You aren't actually legally obliged to help. And obviously Peter Singer is raising there that, again, there is a big issue with that argument. You also need to consider the argument from proportionality, the suffering of illness versus the suffering and pain of death. So again, you need to look at the proportionality, linking it to James Rachel's point, for example, that proportionally having a lethal dose or a lethal injection ends your pain quickly, whereas proportionally the suffering of starving yourself is immense in order to die. And so again, they're not in proportion. A tough question that you need to consider and think about that you might get asked in an exam is, do you think there is a moral difference or moral ethical difference between medical intervention and medical non-intervention? So medical intervention is life support machines, medicine getting involved, medicine intervening, and medical non-intervention, so having no intervention at all, so withdrawing or not providing medicine. So basically this is asking again about the active versus passive. So medical intervention would potentially also be giving someone too much of a dose of morphine, for example, or giving somebody a lethal injection, versus medical non-intervention, which is taking something away or not giving them something. Do you think that there is a moral difference there? What are your views on the passive versus active? So the first theme that you need to know for euthanasia is personhood. There are 3 themes that you need to know. Personhood is the first one. Personhood, basically, it's what separates a human being from a person. So for example, if somebody is in a coffin, are they still a person? Or are they just a human being? Are they just a body of a person that used to live and now they're dead? So do you ever lose your personhood? Is somebody in a coma that can't speak, blink, eat, communicate, are they still a person, or are they a human being? Do you think there is a difference there? If someone is in a persistent vegetative state, are they still a person? Some argue that someone in a PVS is still human, but not entirely a person. So euthanasia is a logical conclusion. The problem is, however, where do you draw the line of who is and who is not a person? So, for example, the Joseph Fletcher quote at the beginning argues that Down syndrome, according to him, are not people. Therefore, they have no personhood and can be euthanized. So where do you draw the line with this? Do you think it's a bit of a slippery slope in the argument, or do you think there is a distinction between human being and person? Is a growing fetus, for example, a person, or is it a human being? When does somebody become a person? Do they lose that personhood, etc.? So this is again something that you need to be thinking about and you need to consider. Grieseth and Boyle stress the importance of personhood. They reject the view that one can cease to be a person and yet be bodily alive. A person in PVS has not lost what makes them a person. Humanity and personhood are one. So they're arguing that there is no distinction between personhood and human being. Sanctity of life is your second theme you need to know. Sanctity of life, this is based on the supreme and intrinsic specialness of human life in itself. Now, please let me be clear. Sanctity of life is not a religious idea. You can be an atheist and believe life is sacred. So Christianity obviously supports this massively. Sanctity of life, and Christianity believes sanctity of life at the core of its teachings, but just because Christianity or other religions take it on board does not mean that it is only a Christian perspective. So please be clear that you may be an atheist, you may be agnostic, you may be a Buddhist, you might be many different faiths or no faiths. Does not mean that you cannot believe in sanctity of life. And it is based on the supreme and intrinsic specialness of human life in itself, that it believes that all life is sacred, it's important, it's special, it should be valued. Bringing in the Christian concept, though, all human life is made in the image and likeness of God, or amigo Dei. So it's the idea that we all have part of God within us. We are all made in the image of God. Therefore, to kill this, you are killing part of God's image. We are also all made with a spark of divinity, the spark of God within us. There is a specialness to humanity as seen through Scripture. So, for example, giving Adam stewardship over the animals to name and look after them. Now, please, when writing a euthanasia essay, Do not fall into the trap of bringing up all of the things that you've learned over the years at secondary school. Your body is a temple. Only God can give life and take it away. Oh, so boring. I have read and heard those things hundreds of times. Give me Amigo Day. Give me Spark of Divinity. Give me A-level standard now. So please try and avoid the things that have been ingrained through school. There's nothing wrong with them, but we want to do better than that now. So looking at things like the two that are underlined and in bold are what you really want to focus on. To take your essay to that next level, so the B and the A grade, you can also make a distinction between strong and weak sanctity of life. Strong is often called pro-life or vitalism, so it argues that all life is sacred, possesses a God-given soul, and no ordinary or extraordinary means justified termination. So nothing ordinary or extraordinary. So basically, there is no case, absolutely no case where euthanasia should be allowed. The moment of conception, egg meets sperm, to natural death. No exceptions, all innocent life must be protected. Weak sanctity of life is the killing of an innocent person out of love is not murder. So it's quite interesting here that the strong is quite like natural law. Innocent life links with the first primary precept, whereas weak sanctity of life links a little bit more to situation ethics. So again, you could make those links, and it's good to make those links. Killing an innocent person out of love is not murder. So when it's the most loving thing to do to help somebody end their pain, that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do according to weak sanctity of life. Murder implies ulterior motives. So there is a difference here between killing and murder. Murder is ulterior motives. Murder is, first degree murder is when you plot and plan it. Killing is the ending of life, but it might be consented to. In exceptional circumstances, it is not wrong. No one deserves to endure a life of extreme pain. Life is a gift, not a burden. Not a gift if the gift giver still has ownership. Now, I think that's a brilliant point. It's a brilliant comeback against Christian arguments, because obviously Christian arguments do say life is a gift from God. Well, if it's a gift, you can do what you want with a gift. You can take your gift back to the shop. So if God's given this as a gift, but then holds it over us as, you cannot destroy this gift, you cannot end this gift, you cannot give this gift back, well, we never asked for this gift, So it's this idea that life is a gift from God. Yes, but you can do what you want with a gift. And if you want to euthanize yourself because you're in excruciating pain, then you should be able to. It's a gift, not a burden. Finally, the third part that you need to know is quality of life. Personhood, sanctity of life, quality of life. The quality of life. Human beings should be able to live dignified lives and end life with dignity. It's this idea of dignity is very, very important. Respect a person's desire to live or die. And the Alkmaar case, now you need to know about the Alkmaar case, but it's just a case in passing. It's not something for you to get bogged down with. In the Netherlands in 1984, a 95-year-old woman could no longer eat or drink. She asked her doctor for a mercy kill, euthanasia. After the doctor had discussed this with her and her son, they decided that life was unbearable. The doctor ended her life. In court, he argued it was his legal duty to alleviate suffering. It was this case that then made the Netherlands reassess their euthanasia policy, and it is legal in the Netherlands. You can go to a place called, it's on the tip of my tongue. Dignitas, there we go. Dignitas is the place in Switzerland where you can go to end your life. That is where you legally can go. However, it is illegal for you from the UK to go there and end your life, because again, you'll be in such a bad way that you would need somebody to help you. So even if you went over there to Dignitas The people that help you could be charged for murder when they come back to England because they have broke an English law, even though they've done it in another country. So another case we look at, Diane Pretty, in a few slides' time. She wanted her husband to help her go across there because obviously this country wouldn't allow it, and they said that they would charge her husband with murder. So again, she wasn't able to go. There's many things you have to go through and show in order to go to Dignitas to end your life. But the main one is that you have to self-administer the medication or the medicine, so they do not give it to you. So if you are in a PVS, if you have locked-in syndrome, if you have such bad Parkinson's disease, for example, or motor neurons, and you cannot actually physically get the tablets or whatever it is to your mouth, then again you cannot go to Dignitas. You have to be self-administering. Peter Singer, so that contributed towards legalisation of euthanasia. Peter Singer is a huge advocate for quality of life. He's a great name to drop in. Peter Singer argues that this shows a move away from sanctity of life towards more quality. People now believe that a person with a low quality of life can judge for themselves if they want to end their own life. So the final bit for the first section is I'm going to send you a link for the No Arms, No Legs man there for Nick. I can't pronounce his second name. So I'm going to send you a link to watch about his life as well. And so I want you to then consider about quality of life. I'll set you up a Padlet as well with some different questions because you're doing ever so well sharing your views on those. But I want to know what your views are on quality of life. I want to know what your views are on active and passive. I want to know what your views are on whether it should be legal or illegal in this country. So I will give you the opportunity to share your thoughts on this Padlet. So this is a good place to stop for the first lesson, but obviously I'm going to continue on. So you're welcome to keep going, or you could pause and do the activities now. So if you are continuing, we're going to now have a look at a case. So I'm just going to go back off it just so that you can listen to the case first without starting to read it. This case is very, very shocking. So it's just a big warning to you now. I've had students get upset in the past in the classroom. This is a very, very upsetting case. But again, it shows the reality of euthanasia. So if you wish to continue watching this to help you develop your views on whether euthanasia should be legalised or not, maybe have a look at this case. This case is an example of where euthanasia, again, is not legal and the length that a father will go to. So, what would you do in this case? The case is this. This is a real story. 13-year-old Tracy had cerebral palsy, severe mental and physical disabilities due to a lack of oxygen at birth. She has no voluntary control over her muscles, unable to walk or talk, and is in constant pain. She cannot be given painkillers as these would cause dangerous seizures. She needs repeated treatment and surgeries and attends a special school. She is described as having a happy disposition, often smiling. What would you do? Would you euthanise or would you not euthanise? What would you do in this situation? So read back through it again. Not quite as easy when you have an actual case in front of you. Would you euthanise or not? Maybe write down your thoughts as well. Okay. The case continued. Robert Latimer, Tracy's dad, put his daughter Tracy in the trunk of his car and connected the hose to the exhaust. Tracy died of carbon monoxide poisoning on the 24th of October 1993. He euthanised his daughter in the trunk of his car. Is he guilty of murder? Should he go to prison? What I want you to think about, because this case is a very distressing case, is this one. I want you to think about what drove that father to do that. Why do you think he did it? Why do you think the trunk of his car? Now, over the years doing this case, I've had many student responses. Students get very riled up with this case. It's obviously a very emotional case, and students share their views very openly. So again, I'm happy to discuss your thoughts with this on Friday when we get together. But this one is probably one of the most shocking cases we'll ever do. And a lot of students over the years have said like words like selfish, definitely guilty of murder, that putting her in the trunk of a car is a coward's way, then you don't have to see her, that it was against her will, that she had a happy disposition. So we've had many comments like that, very much going down the guilty of murder. On the other hand, on the other side of this, there's potentially a very deliberate reason why the trunk of his car and why carbon monoxide. Do any of you know why you think that it may have been the trunk of his car and not the main car, for example? And why do you think carbon monoxide? Carbon monoxide is a silent killer. That's why often in all of your houses you should have little monitors by your fires and things. You should have a carbon monoxide detector. If you don't, go on Amazon, they're really cheap. But basically, carbon monoxide, you can't smell it, and you basically just go to sleep. It's totally painless. So carbon monoxide may have been a very deliberate choice from the father, because it is maybe not that quick, but it's quite quick, but it is painless. Or certainly we assume it's painless, you don't know because the people die. But carbon monoxide is maybe was a deliberate choice. The trunk of the car may have also been a deliberate choice. If she was put in the main car, it would have taken an awful lot longer to fill with the gas, whereas the trunk of the car would have filled up quicker and euthanizing her faster. Now you might be thinking that makes no difference, that he is guilty of murder, that he should not have done that. And again, that is absolutely fine for your justification. So either way that you see this, but think about the decision that he made, the reality of euthanasia. This is the reality of euthanasia. The sentence: Latimer was found guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 10 years before parole. However, a retrial found him guilty and sentenced to 2 years. What changed? What happened? He was found guilty of murder with life imprisonment, to a retrial and given 2 years. Was it because they maybe saw a loving father rather than a murderer? And again, you need to think about that choice. What would you do? Does the reality of seeing what making euthanasia illegal drives people to? Does this give you a reality of euthanasia as a whole and the difficult decisions that people make? And so again, as I've said, I know this is a very shocking case, very shocking case, but it's a very good one to show the reality of the decisions that people have to make. And obviously he would not have had to have done that to his daughter if euthanasia had been legal. He could have then gone through all the relevant paths and actually discussed this with doctors, etc. Please do feel free as well to look into this case in more detail. It's quite a complicated case. There were other children involved. He wasn't a single parent or anything like that. So please do have a look, as obviously this case did shock a lot of people when it came out. But it's a very, very good one for you to use in your essays. Okay, a few more cases. Diane Pretty, she was a British woman that was denied the right to die. When I was growing up, this was kind of the case that introduced me to these discussion areas. She suffered from motor neurons disease. So motor neurons disease is often one of the main symptoms is losing control over certain parts of your body. But it gets far progressively worse, and there is no cure for it either. So it will kill you. She argues that she should have been allowed to die with dignity. The law has taken all my rights away. She campaigned for the right to die. And it was her case where she said, I can still go to the Netherlands, I can still go to Dignitas, I still have enough control over my hands to give myself this lethal dose, but I need my husband to help me on the plane, etc. And that's when our government, our law said, no, if your husband helps you, he is breaking the law and will be punished. She also had at least 2 young children at that point. There is also the Tony Nicklinson case. I would like you to research into Tony Nicklinson. So I would like you to do some research into his case as well, what happened to him, and again, how he had to end his life because euthanasia was not legal. Now, you do not need to use lots of examples in your essays, but they certainly help give your essay some substance. However, many believe, including Christians, that palliative care is available so that euthanasia should not be allowed. Palliative care is the end of life care. So when you are terminally ill, for example, and whatever illness or disease you have will kill you, you can have palliative care. This is like hospice care, basically. End of life care includes palliative care. If you have an incurable illness, palliative care will make you as comfortable as possible by controlling pain while providing psychological, social and spiritual support for you and your family or carers. This is called a holistic approach because it looks at the whole of the case, as it deals with the whole person rather than just one aspect. So this is the alternative that people often present and use rather than euthanasia. However, the case isn't as clear-cut as this. There's also been a lot more recent cases than just baby Charlotte. And again, I want you to have a look into the recent cases. In 2005, Charlotte was born prematurely and with severe brain damage. Against the wishes of her parents, the High Court ordered doctors not to resuscitate if the baby fell into a coma. Why? Because her underlying condition did not justify medical assistance she was being given to stay alive. Hang on a minute though, euthanasia is illegal. I mean, obviously they're not giving her a lethal dose, they're just withdrawing it. So this is, again, comes under the passive, yet this is against her parents' wishes. So the government, again, override and overruled the parents, went against them, and obviously Charlotte did go into a coma and die. But then if we can't euthanize because life is so sacred and you can't, whatever the government reasoning is behind not allowing it, then why allow it in cases like this when it's not consented to? There's been a lot more recent ones, again, that I would like you to research into. I want to say baby Alfie is one of them. I know there's been at least 2 other cases. One case where a little toddler had a very, very bad illness, and the family raised money. I think he was either a toddler or a baby, raised money to take him to America for untrialed studies and tests. Yes, they weren't things that had actually gone out to the public, but they said, we have nothing to lose. We're going to lose our baby anyway. Please, try these new treatments on him in the hopes that you save him. And it wouldn't have even cost our government anything because they raised millions to take the baby over there, and the government again said, no, you will not get on a plane. We are not letting you get on a plane. You cannot take that child to another country for this medical treatment. So why is Sanctity of Life so important in one case, like Tony Nicholson's, where he has to starve himself to death, yet in Baby Charlotte or other baby cases, it's all right. So again, I want you to think about these things. Think about where that line is drawn and how difficult this actually is. And again, the more layers you get into in your essay, the more it could be this, but how about this? But then what about this? That's what your essays should be like. You should under no circumstances write an essay that says euthanasia is wrong, for example, or euthanasia is right. You should discuss the layers of this argument and how complex it is. You are not actually meant to conclude anything. Your conclusion is your line of argument, but you are not meant to, you're not concluding whether euthanasia should or should not be legalised. What you're going to conclude is whether things like sanctity of life work or don't work, personhood should be applied or not, natural law works in euthanasia cases. That's what you're doing. So these layers of it could be this, but how about this is what you need to focus on. The slippery slope, however. Many fear that if euthanasia was made legal, then the slippery slope would happen. The value of human life would decrease based on economics, such as saving the NHS or family money, or personal convenience. So somebody becomes an inconvenience, therefore it's easy to euthanize them. So this is one of the arguments that governments often use as to why euthanasia is not legalized, because of the slippery slope problem that we're running out of life support machines, we're running out of support to help people, medical allowances. Therefore, you save the NHS money by euthanizing certain people, that families want their inheritance, that the government believed that the slippery slope would happen and people would start euthanizing the elderly for nothing other than economics or convenience. Is that really the case? Do you really think that that's what would happen in this country? Helga Kuss certainly does not believe so. She comes from the Netherlands, and she says the Netherlands are not following the example of Nazi Germany in making some lives valueless for reasons other than mercy or respect. So what she's arguing there is that it isn't like Nazi Germany, where you euthanize the elderly and you euthanize the disabled and you euthanize the people with Down syndrome, like Joseph Fletcher says. But actually, the only reason why you euthanize is for mercy and respect. She is a utilitarian bioethicist, so we do utilitarianism in a couple of weeks' time. She was also the president of the World Federation of the Right to Die Society, so obviously she's biased, but she is the president of the Euthanasia Society. So people for euthanasia then. Daniel Maguire there in his very smart red tie. He said it's important to respect and value life, but should not be obliged to prolong it in every situation. He rejects the view that God alone has the power over life and death. If God alone decides time of death, does this not mean that we are no more than God's property? We intervene to save life and preserve it. There's no real difference between ending life and preserving it. He has some really, really good points there in my mind, in my view. And again, you don't need to remember all the bullet points. And what you need to do with the bullet points is you need to actually engage with them, evaluate them. Just by putting his support of euthanasia is not evaluation. You're just describing his view. You have to say whether his view works or does not work. You have to say whether it's convincing or not. And for me, I find some of his points there very, very convincing. So, for example, what he's saying is, if God decides when we die, then does that just mean we belong to God, that we're minions of God, that we just are waiting for God to make that decision? Do we not give away all our free will, etc., to that view? More importantly, though, that last point there, we intervene to save life and preserve it. We give people life support machines. We give people pacemakers, we give people medicines. We're intervening in the natural course, so why is that intervention allowed, yet intervening to help end a life not allowed? So what he's saying is, if it's God's decision when we die, yet you're keeping them alive in a life support machine. Why is that all right, but then ending someone's life, again, when God doesn't decide, wrong? So I like his point there, that we're intervening in some ways, but not intervening in others. Why is one right and one wrong? Jonathan Glover, in Causing Death and Saving Lives, he says to refuse to provide help is a very serious denial of the person's autonomy over the matter of his own life and death. Autonomy, free choice, free will. Okay, so please, this is the end of the second lesson. This is the end of the second section. What I would like you to do, please, is to do the research tasks. I'll put them in an email. So I want you to research into people like Tony Nicholson. And again, I want you to, I'll probably set up a Padlet or some sort of discussion for us to have a look at what your views are on the Tracy Latimer case. Okay, so the third and final section of euthanasia is applying, first of all, the religious approaches. So that's applying natural law and then situation ethics afterwards. But obviously situation ethics doesn't necessarily class as religious because it could be both. Natural law. Now, first of all, how this slide is laid out is extremely important. You will not do very well in an essay if you say natural law is against euthanasia because it ends life. Wow, groundbreaking. No. You'll be lucky to get higher than a D grade if you are as shallow as that in your arguments. You have to dig deep. You have to look at the layers of natural law. Look at the hierarchy of the moral code. You need to look at the 5 primary precepts. You need to look at the secondary precepts. You need to look at apparent and real goods. So use your revision posters, and you will get an activity where you have to do this. Use your revision posters and have a look at how all the different segments of that natural law revision poster can link to euthanasia. And some points, so for example, if you're looking at ordered society, that also might prong out. Ordered society might go for and against euthanasia. That's where you get your marks, okay? So what you need to do again is you're not saying whether natural law is for or against conclusively. You're looking at the layers. It could be this, but it could be this. But then if it's ordered society, well, ordered society means saving money for the NHS when people want to die. But then ordered society isn't euthanizing everyone's slippery slope. But then ordered society is this, but then ordered society is that. That's how you get your grades, okay? So let's give you some ideas for and against. It does allow for patients to refuse treatment. So for euthanasia and for natural law, it would allow passive euthanasia. So it's already supporting euthanasia because it supports passive euthanasia. You cannot force somebody to have a life support machine. So it does allow patients to refuse treatment. Also, the doctrine of double effect could be applied. So do you remember your morphine example where you give them a high dosage that ends up killing them? It's not quite euthanasia because your intention is genuine, but they still die. Burdensome treatments which unnecessarily extend life is not required or even allowed. So burdensome treatments, so again, 4th round of chemotherapy, burdensome, painful treatments in order to keep someone alive a bit longer is not necessary. Greek physician Hippocrates is in the Hippocratic Oath that all doctors take, appears to be in favour of a form of euthanasia in case of incurable patients. A doctor should refuse to treat those who are overmastered by their disease, realising that in such cases medicine is powerless. So even the Hippocratic Oath, which promotes preserving and saving all life, actually says that if they are overmastered, consumed by disease, you do not have to give them treatment. However, natural law would also be seen as against euthanasia. Preservation of life, obviously. Duty of a doctor to preserve life, again, the Hippocratic Oath. I give no deadly medicine to anyone if asked, nor suggest any such counsel. So deadly medicine meaning something to kill them, so they can't suggest it or follow it if someone asks. They're concerned not simply with the physical body, but the whole person ultimate end. Everyone is linked to God's ultimate plan. Ending one's life ends the possibility of pursuing other precepts, so to educate, live in a community, worship God. But then if you are in locked-in syndrome, can you really, do these things anyway? Euthanasia is an apparent good that seems to alleviate pain, but in fact fails to reach the greater good so that you live and flourish in society, etc. So this is only a snapshot though, and these don't really, so in your hierarchy, for example, I would want you to link divine law to different for and against euthanasia. On natural law, I would want you to link, you know, the synderesis, the do good and avoid evil. How would you link that across? So you need to be very specific in the links that you make. And this isn't about is it right or wrong, it's your interpretation of how those things apply. So you can't get it wrong. The only thing you can get wrong is by not making a link. If you make a link, you get the mark. But one of the big questions to do with natural law is what is actually natural? Life support machines to preserve life are actually unnatural. You're keeping somebody alive with a machine. You're keeping their heart pumped with a machine. God is trying to take that life away, but you're keeping them alive on a life support machine. Isn't that unnatural? But is it natural? Does this mean that turning off life support machine and not preserving life is acceptable to a natural lawist? And again, you can ask questions like this in your exam, that's fine. Does this also mean that all medicine and interventions that keep us alive are unnatural? Obviously, quite a few medicines have a natural source, but some medicines certainly are, and certainly certain interventions like pacemakers. So you know, when you have the box put into your chest to keep your heart rhythm and pumping, etc., you have something that's not natural inside you to keep you alive. Is that then unnatural? Should you not then use it? However, pacemakers are in line with preservation of life. So again, this is where it gets confusing. This is what you have to explore in an essay, that certain things seem unnatural, but then we're preserving life. So where does the natural versus preserve life? Where do you draw that line? Yet, natural law argues that we are given free will and the God-given gift of reason. And doctors are using their reason to preserve life, even if it's with life support machines, pacemakers, medicines, etc. So isn't this just natural progression? So the point of this slide is how you to get your A's and your B's. This slide is very, very important. The point of this is to show that there is no clear-cut answers. Your job is to explore all the different avenues in your essays and weigh up which views are more or less helpful. So, yes, it is unnatural to give life support machines, pacemakers, etc. But actually, we have got to those decisions, got to those conclusions. We've made those using our God-given gift of reason. God gave us reason. God gave us free will. And so we have used that reason to create these things to preserve life. So maybe it is natural because our natural reason has helped us get to that point. Natural law in the Catholic Church, it's never a completed PowerPoint without the Catholic Church coming in somewhere. The Catholic Church argued that it is euthanasia, a rejection of God's sovereignty and loving plan, so God's power. It is also wrong, according to the Catholic Church, to ask someone to assist your death, as amongst other things, it violates the divine law, the Bible law. But the Pope makes a distinction between ordinary and extraordinary means. These terms used within medical profession to not just religious, so ordinary and extraordinary means are medical terms. I don't know which Pope it is, you'll have to give it a quick Google, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's certainly not Pope Francis. I think it was the previous Pope. Ordinary treatment is obligatory. You have to do ordinary treatment, so that's things like food and water, but you do not have to do extraordinary, such as surgery, therapies, life support. So again, they're supporting passive euthanasia in that sense. The Pope supports the giving of ordinary but not extraordinary. Finally, final slide, situation ethics. Fletcher served as the president of the Euthanasia Society of America in 1974 to 76, 2 years. 2 years, it must be after those 2 years they realised that he wanted to euthanise Down syndrome babies potentially and then got demoted. Who knows? But certainly I wouldn't want the leader of the Euthanasia Society to have those sorts of views. He believed that personhood matters. He said it's a matter of dignity and patient autonomy. Quality of life is more important than sanctity of life. So again, he's a really good name to drop in those sections in your essay. So when you talk about quality of life, you could drop Joseph Fletcher in with Peter Singer. If you're talking about patient autonomy, if you're looking at people like Diane Pretty, you could drop his point in there. That's fine. So again, you don't have to just keep situation ethics as a chunk. Try and get bits into your essays as you're going through. So where you see a link, make that link. That makes you a far, far better writer. This, by the way, as well, application essays are the hardest type of essays. So this is really taking your essay writing skills to that next level, trying to combine two topics together. So it is harder, and we will do some work and some practice with these. On many occasions, the person is no longer truly present in situations of euthanasia, and therefore taking the life is permitted. And so he gives these 12. Don't panic, you don't have to learn them all, but certainly learning 3 or 4 would be great. Fletcher identified positive human criteria. Even that just, a positive human criteria. The criteria that makes you human. This judges whether you are just a person, just a human, or whether you have personhood as well. So his 12 are this: minimal intelligence, self-awareness, self-control, sense of passage of time, concern for others, communication, control over existence, curiosity, possibility of change, balance of reason and feeling, identity and thinking. The more of them you have, the more of a person you are. I want you to go through that list now. How many do you have? Do you always balance your reason and your feelings? Would you class yourself as self-controlled, curious? Can you spot? So is this list fair? Can you see any problems with it? And now can you see why and how he justified the Down syndrome argument? What issues do you see with those 12? One issue that you might see is that some perfectly healthy, normal adults don't show those things. That certain people with certain disabilities might not be able to do those things. Doesn't make them any less of a person. Babies. A baby cannot do most of those things. Does that mean it's all right to euthanize any baby? Somebody in a PVS. Somebody with dementia. Somebody with dementia doesn't have a lot of those. Does that mean it's all right to euthanize them? So there are a multitude of issues with these. Also, what do some of them mean? What does control over existence mean? Does that mean being able to end your life when you want, which you can't do? Does it mean deciding when you started to exist? Again, we didn't decide when we were born. So number 7, what does that actually mean? Communication, at what level? What's classed as minimal intelligence? What's the minimal mean? Does that mean knowing 2 + 2 = 4? Or does that mean, what does it mean? What is minimal intelligence? So again, with these, a good criteria that you can criticise in an exam and in an essay. But as I said, you do not need to learn all 12. My recommendation is learn the few that you can then do something with, whether you support them or go against them. So I would pick the few that you actually have something that you could engage with them. So that's it. That's euthanasia. So quite a big chunk, quite a big topic, split into your 3. You need to make sure you do your research tasks because you need to be able to talk about those cases, the baby cases Tony Nicklin said. You need to make sure that you know where you stand on euthanasia, and again, make sure you fill out the Padlet boards that I'll set up. And then finally, we will start to have a look at how to actually write this as an essay, so how these essays look and how to do them. So we are going to practice this, but there's no point practicing it until you are confident with both situation ethics and natural law and euthanasia, because you will definitely not be able to write it in an essay if you cannot understand the topics to begin with. One activity that I am going to get you to do though is to do an updated bubble now, so an updated revision poster where you now link each of your segments, each of your points to natural law. So I want you to be able to make your links and then link it to euthanasia in all the different ways. The more offshoots you have, the better you will do. And where you jump backwards and forwards, you're not meant to have an argument and an answer. You're meant to jump backwards and forwards. It could be this, but how about this? In some cases it's this, but then what about this? But then this happens, how about this? You're meant to jump backwards and forwards. That's what makes your essays brilliant. All right, folks, thank you very, very much. I hope you found this useful. If you do have any questions, obviously just send me an email. That's no problem. Or drop me a comment underneath. Otherwise, thanks very much, everyone. Bye for now. Let me make you smaller.